Hi. Hi.
Let's settle into our seats, and I'd love to introduce our speaker for today, Charlotte Brielle, on Culture is Dynamic, but Birth is Universal. Charlotte is the founder and executive director of Wombs of the World, a global initiative dedicated to uplifting birth workers, preserving traditional midwifery, and improving maternal health outcomes. With a background as a full spectrum doula and perinatal social worker, Charlotte has worked across cultures and continents, weaving together advocacy, education, and hands-on birth support to create transformative experiences for both birth workers and the families they serve. We will have time for questions at the end of this presentation, so please write anything into the chat, and Wendy and I will keep up with that. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you so much for having me. So happy to be here. That was such a great introduction. I would love to, if it's possible for me to change to active gallery, I would love a little show of hands that who here is an active birth worker. I'm assuming a lot of people on here are in the field of birth work. As Ashley so beautifully said, I am the executive director of Wombs of the World, which takes essentially professional birth workers such as doulas, labor and delivery nurses, midwives, OBGYNs on trips around the world to be of service and to learn from traditional midwives. We currently have trips in 4 locations. We've got Tanzania, Ecuador, Mexico, and South Africa. The Mexico, Ecuador, and South Africa trips are really about honoring Indigenous ancestral knowledge. So we spend 10 days shadowing Indigenous midwives, learning about ceremony, traditions, and really just the reverence of birth, the ceremony that is birth. Our Tanzania program is our only program that offers a hands-on component, and that is where the story of Wombs of the World begins. So I got ahead of myself telling you about the programs. I will now rewind and tell you about how Wombs of the World came into being. I completed my doula training in 2017. I'm sure, like many of you, I had the calling for birth work at a very young age. I wasn't all that young in 2017, but completed my training, and then I had the opportunity to travel to Tanzania to volunteer at a maternity clinic. And people always ask, like, how did that come into being? And it was literally a Google search. It was like a Google search that connected me with this Canadian midwife who was like, come on over, we'll get you set up. So I showed up in Tanzania as a brand, I called myself a baby doula. Like I was a brand new, very, very fresh doula. However, I did have a tremendous amount of experience in travel. So it didn't feel like a huge jump to go all the way to Tanzania. I had done a lot of travel around Southeast Asia, around India, so it didn't feel like a huge leap to go all the way there. However, little did I know what was in store for me. It was really intense. I was there for 10 straight days and witnessed over 30 babies be born, and also witnessed 4 babies leave this earth, all so quickly. Witnessed all kinds of birth. Witnessed twin birth and breech birth and stillbirth and cesarean birth, and all of these births happened in a very, very, very low-resourced clinic. I mean, so low-resourced, there's no running water. There was power outages in the middle of a surgery, and one of my favorite things, but like a bird flying around in the OR, like very, very, very low resourced clinics. And so I just had such like an awakening to birth so early on in my career. I had only attended 3 births in the US at the time before going to Tanzania. So I had a lot to learn really quickly. And then as I was processing this, I was sharing my experience a little bit on my brand new Instagram page at the time, my little doula page. And I was using the hashtag Wombs of the World. And other doulas from all over the place. Really, it was Germany that came in. I got a lot of messages from other doulas saying, like, that's so cool. How did you do that? I want to do that. And it was immediately the click of, oh, doulas want to travel. And I'm not alone in this world. So eager to be of service, like wanting to go be of service in areas that are welcome to service and travel and just like hold babies was really at the time the intention. And so that's kind of how Wombs of the World was initially born. I had this idea of like, okay, well, I'll go back with a group of doulas. The reason I didn't connect doulas directly with the clinic was because I didn't know them. I didn't know if they would show up, if they would abuse privilege, if they would abuse power, if they would pretend they were midwives, because the nurse midwives who are receiving us at the clinics, they don't know what to do. They don't know the scope of practice of a doula. Like we are there demonstrating what doulas do, but they often think that we're like students, like midwifery students or nursing students, but now, years later, they're very familiar with what doulas do. But at the time, very unfamiliar. So I didn't want to just connect people that I didn't know. And I didn't want a random traveler that I connected with this clinic to be traumatized the way that I was. I finished my 10 days there and I had so many questions and no one to decompress with. No one at home, none of my new doula friends at home could possibly understand what I had just witnessed. And so that's how the idea was born of we will take a group, we will go be of service, we will go learn, and then we will have each other to learn from and transition back into our day-to-day lives and feel supported in this group dynamic. So the intention was great, started off really well. Little before I knew it, we had over 40 applicants. It just like overnight sensation on the interwebs. And next thing I know, we're getting an LLC and creating a website and opening a bank account. And it just all happened very, very smoothly. Before even getting to Tanzania the following year with a group, I was like, it's called Wombs of the World. Where else do I have connections? Where else can we do a similar thing? And when I was 16, I did a semester abroad in Ecuador, and I reached back out to my old Spanish teacher and was like, hey, I'm working on this maternal health project. Do you have any leads in this area? And he was like, I sure do. My cousin works at this clinic in northern Ecuador where you used to do your homestay. Here's her number. So I call Saskia, and Saskia's like, yeah, come on down. I'll get you set up. She did not realize I was going to get on an airplane and go down there and go talk to her. And so I'm walking around the hospital in Otavalo, and I'm like, are you Saskia? Are you Saskia? I'm looking for Saskia. Saskia ends up introducing me to the head of the hospital, who introduces me to the head of OB, who introduces me to their resident Indigenous midwife. And at the time, what I was expecting to do was just a similar trip to what was going on in Tanzania, like a hands-on clinical trip for doulas. And now our Ecuador program has evolved into this incredible program that's really, really centered around traditional Indigenous midwifery. This particular region of the world has such an amazing community of traditional healers and midwives, and they have been fighting for generations now to keep their knowledge alive and preserve it. And this is one of the few areas in the world that has. And they are generously sharing so much of their knowledge with our groups when we travel. So that was back in 2018. We launched the first trip to Tanzania in 2019, and we did 3 back-to-back trips with we were 8 doulas in each group. That was, for me at the time, a huge mistake. Never again will I do 3 back-to-back trips. That was way too much. But we learn as we go. And we set the stage for something. We started developing these relationships with these clinics. At the time when we went back in 2019, we were working at 2 different ones. And they're all in the same region, and the region is called Karatu. It's like very inland in Tanzania. If you have any geographical reference of Tanzania, it's very much inland. And each clinic averages about between 120 and 180 births a month. So we were pretty busy. And the way that our doulas were showing up that first round, they were just there loving on moms. That was really the idea of, so I'll paint the scene a little bit of what birth looks like in these spaces. So one of the coolest things about it is that it's super community oriented. All of the clinics that we work in now, we work in 3 different ones. They all have one like communal labor room, and it's also the postpartum room. So if you're laboring or if you have your baby already, you're in this one room. What I love about it is sometimes you can't tell like which auntie goes with which mom or with which baby, because it's such a communal experience that there's always going to be someone taking care of other people. And also this idea of one mom being able to witness the mom next to her for breastfeeding, or if she has to go to the bathroom or something, she knows that there's always people there watching, which is great. Once they are feeling like they're about to push, they walk themselves to a different room that's further in the back, and it's there's usually like 3 beds in there, and sometimes they can be giving birth one next to each other. Most of the time, in my experience, it's just kind of one person at a time. Although sometimes there are many people birthing at the same time, and it's a pretty wild experience. But they go back there, and then that's where the babies are born. So they call that like the delivery room. Just for some context, and these are things that my doulas have as takeaways. There are no comfort measures there. You know, it's like I go back to I have like the reverse culture shock when I go back to do birth work in the States, or I'm currently based in France, and it's like I have moms that are requesting so many pillows, and I'm all for pillows, and I'm all for peanut balls, and I'm all for all of the things. And then you go there and there's just absolutely nothing. And on top of that, the women there, when they birth, they're so stoic. And it's like a very cultural thing, stoicism, that sometimes you can't tell if they're laboring or not. Like they won't make sounds through labor. Labor is done in complete silence. And they have reasons for that, which is to contain their strength. That's like a primary reason. And then also to not disrupt the people around them. And that silence is enforced by the nursing staff. I have seen many mamas get a nice slap on the cheek for expressing their pain. So then we, as the doulas, mostly from the West, but we have had participants from all over the world, all the hemispheres, join us on trips, but mostly Western birth workers join us. You know, we have reactions. We have our opinions as to what we're seeing. It's like we're seeing a nurse slap a mom for making noise throughout a contraction. Meanwhile, I'm like, be primal, mama, make as much noise as you want. And we always have to take a step back and be curious and not judge. So that's like a primary foundation in when we're preparing our doulas to travel to Tanzania. It's always about curiosity, never about judgment. And this is constantly something that we are learning because there are often times we see something and it will make very little sense to me. It'll make very little sense as to like, why are we doing it like that? And it turns out there is usually always a reason. When there are such limited resources, they are getting very, very creative. And when there's such limited resources, like life and death become so much simpler. You know, we don't fight things the way that we do in the Western medical system. When babies are born distressed and there's no NICU, there is a common acceptance that that baby is going to breathe for however long that baby is going to breathe and then is going to transition. And it's not something that is fought by either staff or by the parent. That took me a long time to get used to. Now I have been back to Tanzania over 10 times with over 80 different birth workers. I've seen hundreds of babies be born there. And it can be really intense every single time. Clearly, I'm still processing and now processing with all of you. But it has taught me so much about the fragility of life and the reverence I have for birth and the strength of those mothers every single time. Every single time. And I will circle back to that because I want to talk to you later about the tagline of this session is culture is dynamic, but birth is universal. So is death. And there's a lot of ways that different cultures, and especially birth workers, honor both life and death because we know we are at the portal both times. So that first experience in Tanzania in 2019, when we took the 3 trips back to back, initially at the time we had all these ideas of things we wanted to do. We wanted to bring a doula training to Tanzania, and we just wanted to do so much. And we took a big deep breath, took a step back, and we're like, what do you all want and need? Other than us coming in with our very good intentions, what do you want and what do you need? And the first thing that we fundraised for back in the day was an ultrasound machine. There were, like I was saying, 120 and 180 babies being born at these clinics with no ultrasound machine, which also speaks to just like how incredible the staff is for managing all those births without the kind of prenatal support that we experience most of the time. And that's what we got them. And just in the process of acquiring an ultrasound machine in Tanzania, learned a lot about you can't just ship medical equipment over because we had a lot of people in the States was like, oh, we're happy to donate. Their electrical systems are different, their power grids are different, and if something breaks, it needs to be able to get replaced. So I'm giving you that as an example of there's always just so many layers. We have to always go in with curiosity, even when we have a good idea, like a good idea of let's bring a doula training to Tanzania so that birth can be gentler and moms stop getting slapped for making noise. Like that intention is great, but it needs to be received. It needs to be received and they need to be open to receiving it. And so they have to lead it. So now we have a whole emphasis on community-led initiatives, which I will talk to you about a little bit later. Once Tanzania was a go and it was like, okay, here's a thing. This is a whole thing. We launched Ecuador and we traveled to Ecuador with 2 groups in July of 2019. And at the time, we did end up getting shifts in the clinics, and so we were kind of breaking our groups up between clinical shifts and shadowing midwives. And it was an amazing opportunity. We had this connection with all of these different Indigenous midwives, and I don't know why they trusted us. Our first trip was such a mess, such a mess. We would like show up in villages and communities without any cell service, and I had no idea where I was going. And these midwives don't speak Spanish; they speak Quechua. And I was just walking around looking for the midwife, and these doulas who trusted me were walking behind me, and luckily they didn't know how lost I was in the whole thing, really fake it till you make it kind of experience. But we learned a tremendous amount from these midwives, and we sat in ceremony with them, and we witnessed how mostly their primary tool is a rebozo. So I'm sure everybody is familiar with the term rebozo, but seeing a midwife in action doing home visits and repositioning babies and doing these things second nature that they've been learning from the time they were young women supporting the midwife elder in their community. Now we have, like Spinning Babies has whole huge workshops on it. And this is just Indigenous knowledge that has been passed down to them. So we were on to a really great start. Ecuador and Tanzania, we really had a vision, we had a mission, and then COVID hit. And obviously nobody traveled during that period of time. And I was like, the world will never be the same. We will never hug anybody ever again, just to take you back to that initial time. And so during that time, I went to grad school and I got my master's in social work with a specialty in maternal mental health and just like maternal health in general, which that was not obviously like an offering in grad school. I just made every single one of my possible projects or research paper based something that would eventually serve Wombs of the World because I was eager to get back to work. So things that I focused on was grief, the loss and grief journey, as I told you. Birth work is both sides of that coin, life and death, the two certainties of this human existence. And also social change, social systems, and social justice. Those were my emphasis in grad school. And then I graduated and did a lot during that time. That would be a whole different, much longer presentation if I were to tell you about grad school. But in 2022, we got back to work and we went back to Ecuador. And the program shifted there because I didn't want to go back to the clinics. I just felt like it was too soon with COVID. I didn't want to show up a bunch of foreigners who had just gotten off an airplane, show up in a birth space and offer mom support with all that PPE on. It didn't feel like the right move at the time. So we transitioned, and I ended up partnering with this incredible community midwife named Partera Di Anaku. I highly recommend you give her a follow on Instagram. It's Partera Di Anaku, D-I, that D. And Martha's amazing. She works with her mother, so it's like a mother-daughter duo, Martha and Luzmila. And Martha is not only a community midwife, but she is also she just graduated like 2 weeks ago with her law degree. She's going to be the next president of Ecuador. I said it here first. So Martha, she has her law degree. She's a traditional midwife. She's an herbalist. She's a mother to 5 kids. She is a poet. She is just like the most incredible community activist. And she understood my mission when I showed up and I was like, I want to bring birth workers from around the world together to learn from you. She was like, cool. We have a lot of things to teach, and this world needs to do a whole lot of healing. So our trip with her really evolved into a partnership where I let her design the week that we spend together. So we have a whole day focused on just like womb recognition and womb healing. We have a whole day recognizing the cosmology, the cosmovision of the area and the Indigenous ancestral knowledge that's there. We have 2 days dedicated to like rebozo and ceremony for both pregnancy support and postpartum support. So I'm sure you've heard of things like closing of the bone ceremonies. We learn that directly from these midwives. And it is such an incredible honor and gift to sit there and learn from them, to learn with them. And when we've asked them about the responsibility that we now carry with this knowledge of how can we share it in a way that is not appropriating, but appreciating. Those are important things for us as an organization. There's this very wise elder named Tai Tai Oscar. He's a healer in the community, and he told us that for centuries, through colonization, through all the atrocities that Indigenous populations have faced around the world, that for centuries, all of their seeds of knowledge they have had to hide. They have had to hide all of their seeds of knowledge away in order to protect them. And now in 2025, this conversation was in 2023, but in 2025, the Modern day colonization is globalization, is tourism. The way that languages are being lost and knowledge is being lost. The way that children are learning English and not their grandparents' languages to accommodate tourism. Like, this is obviously super problematic for traditional indigenous knowledge and just how quickly it's dying out. So he told me that in order to preserve these seeds of knowledge, we must share them. We must share them and we must plant them everywhere. And the midwives, we all acknowledge that we're walking the same path. You know, it's like we're all birth workers. We all just want better birth outcomes. We want to revere birth. Birth is the most sacred of ceremonies, and it should be treated as such. And unfortunately, as we probably all know, I don't need to give you a history in the medicalization of birth, but in the last 150 or so years, birth has become so medicalized, and we have really lost this connection to the ceremony of birth, to the ceremony of transitioning from maiden to mother, from person to parent. And in Ecuador, they say this all the time. They're like, life is a ceremony. Like, life is a ceremony. They live, at least this particular community, lives with such intentionality that nothing is done without ceremony. Nothing is done without ritual. And so there are just so many beautiful things that our birth workers get to learn from sharing space with these women, with these healers, learning about herbal knowledge, and then finding ways of incorporating that knowledge into their own practice, taking those seeds home and planting them to better serve their clients. I see that there are some questions in the comments. Should I take a breath? Because sometimes I forget to breathe when I'm talking. Anything? Okay.
There's some things, Charlotte, if we want to hit on those. Sheila asked, how do the cosmologies of Tanzania cosmology impact the laboring women and childbirth narrative?
That's a great question. And I'm going to assume cosmology, you're asking more about some of the just like traditional indigenous approaches to birth. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all for, you should come to my courses online because I do talk about this for many, many hours. But what's amazing in Tanzania is that Tanzania itself is they call themselves a socialist country, but what that means is that there's a lot of different tribes living harmoniously with each other. And so there's a lot of different cultures that have blended in one place, and there's a ton of different languages, but their common language is all Swahili. I think that Tanzania is experiencing globalization, what I was just talking about, like that impact to traditional cultures, harder and faster than most places around the world. Like, I'm just going to tangent for a quick sec. The Maasai people in Tanzania are the oldest nomadic tribe in the world. They have been roaming the lands of East Africa, like the Kenya-Tanzania region, since the dawn of time. Literally, the earliest Homo remains of like even before Homo sapien are found on that land. Like, it is old knowledge and old land. And these Maasai people, the warriors, like they are Maasai warriors, in the last 2 generations, this land that they've been able to travel, to hunt, to just live on the way that they've been living on for thousands of years has now been privatized, and all of their land is now national parks. And those national parks are open to safaris. And so we are seeing the impact of, again, like colonization, but in a different light. And now that light is tourism. And so these Maasai people have now been given reservations that they're living on. And it's not land that they can hunt. Like, hunting has become illegal. There's just like so many ways that their way of life has been so drastically impacted in just a generation or two. So Wombs of the World, we have the incredible opportunity to connect with a particular Maasai community who is just, again, kind of like a friend of a friend. I was like, I want to meet traditional birth attendants, traditional midwives. She was like, okay, well, I have a friend who's a Maasai woman. Let's go talk to her. So we went as a group. And the first time we had no idea really what we were getting ourselves into. But we were a group of 8 doulas. And we show up at this Maasai community with our amazing translator, this woman named Judy, who's a nurse midwife, Maasai, but who works as a nurse midwife at a hospital. And Judy facilitated this exchange, this conversation exchange, where we were asking each other questions on birth, on marriage, on sex, on periods, on raising children. And we were asking them questions, and they were asking us questions, and everyone was uncomfortable and embarrassed and giggling. And it was awesome. It was so awesome. And now we've been going back to this particular village for years and years, and I have built great relationships. There is a Charlotte in the community she's like 8 months old now. And and they have shared so much about the way that they birth. And I wish that I could recreate this, but essentially, they have a whole lot of beliefs around birth that are not evidence-based in the slightest. And sometimes we sit there and we listen to their stories and we're like, okay, okay. And I have to take a step back and I'm like, I am not here in an educator capacity. Like there's already so much Western influence that I do not need to come in with my like science and tell them what vernix is when they believe vernix to be something completely different. So when they do talk to us about birth, what they do, oh, I have so many things to tell you. What they do is first, after the first like 3.5 months, women stop eating. They go to a diet of milk and blood. So their hope is to have a very small baby for an easier birth. So they stop eating and they just go to milk and blood. Turns out milk and blood, very nutritious. Not very delicious, but fairly nutritious. So they go to milk and blood, and then they stop having marital relations at 3 months as well. And at like 7 months, they go inside and they like really slow down on work, which is fine. Once they're in labor, or once they're starting to push, the midwife, the like traditional midwife, will, how do they take blood? I'll circle to that. So one woman will sit down. She'll like sit down flat, her back straight and her legs extended. The birthing person will come and she will squat over this mama, like over the midwife. She will squat over the midwife, and then her mother or her sister or someone else will be behind her, kind of like holding up her arms. So like she's being supported. And then she squats and delivers the baby onto the midwife's legs. And then they take hair, or they from like a cow's hair that they have on like a kind of like, it looks like a pen, but they have hair, and then they'll make her gag with it to expel the placenta. And that's how they give birth. And then they stay inside for the first 4 months, and that baby does not see sunlight for 4 months. Complete isolation for the first 4 months. And I gotta say, I was very surprised every single time to show up and see how fat these babies are after 4 months. They fatten those babies up so much. As soon as that mama gives birth, she is being fed so much food, high calorie diet. And then we go on walks with them and we learn about some of the herbs that they combine with milk to fatten babies up. It's a very interesting process. That kind of delivery obviously would not happen at the clinic. And there's a lot of things at the clinic that is not being honored in terms of like different lineages, different ancestral knowledge. And in fact, there's a whole lot of discrimination against the Maasai people at the clinics, because the local people, like the other tribes, believe the Maasai, and I think this is, I mean, obviously I have a lot of ideas that are still based in curiosity as I explore this, but for thousands of years, the Maasai were warriors, and they like, messed with people big time. They were the warriors. They were going in and taking what they wanted because no one could mess with them. So I think generationally later, they're kind of mad at the Maasai people. But mostly the Maasai people are one with nature. And that's how they describe them, that they are one with nature, that they live with the animals, that they are animals. That is the prejudice against the Maasai. And so when they come into the clinics, they are not treated well at all. And so they much rather birth at home. But when they birth at home, I'm sure you birth workers, I just told you a bunch of stuff, like they stop eating, like a lot of things can go wrong. A lot of things can go wrong. So most of the time at the clinics, when we see some really high risk transferring that happens, it's usually a Maasai woman that comes in. That was not necessarily an answer to your question, but I hope I covered some of the culture is dynamic, birth is universal aspects of Maasai birth in Tanzania. And then there's a bunch of other tribes too. Like there's the Hadza tribe, and they birth in caves. I didn't get their midwives to demonstrate the actual position in which they birth, but they will travel. They're also nomadic, so they travel and with a pregnant woman until they find a safe cave to birth in, and then they all kind of post up around the cave until she gives birth, and then they will move on again with this baby. So different than the Maasai who hibernate indoors, and I'm saying in their little circular mud huts. They don't go outside for 4 days, and there's a window about this big in the hut to let in just a very small amount of light. It's fascinating. Okay, I'm gonna breathe. And then tell you more about Ecuador as we transition over there and the way that they give birth. This particular region that we travel to in the north, it's called Cotacachi. It's in the region of Imbabura. And if you've been to Ecuador before, the largest town is Otavalo. And Otavalo is known for its huge textile markets. And a reason that the traditional midwifery or just traditional indigenous way of life was more preserved there than in other places, it was that colonizers, as they came, they needed the locals to make textiles for them because it was cold. So it was like through art that they were able to salvage a lot of their culture. This particular clinic, the ones that we worked at that first year that we were there in Otavalo, they have a 90% vaginal birth rate. And of that 90% vaginal birth rate, 75% of those births are done vertically. They have a room there they got a grant back in like 2008, and they built out a birth room to encourage more Indigenous women to come birth there, because in a lot of places all over the world, United States included, Indigenous women, BIPOC women, are uncomfortable going to the clinics because of how they're going to be treated. So they much rather birth at home, but all over the world are huge initiatives to get more women to birth in clinics. And so this hospital in Ecuador designed a birth room that would maybe like resemble more of a home situation for them so that they would feel more comfortable birthing in the clinics. And so this particular room, it's pretty big, low lights. There's a big rope hanging from the ceiling that they can hold on to. Underneath that rope is a birthing stool. Underneath the birthing stool is a thin mattress. Against the wall are squat bars and another mattress. And so women will kind of like labor in one space, and then when they're feeling transitioning, they will go into the other room. And I love witnessing birth in this space because I have seen moms like hold on to a rope and like their feet come off the ground as they're pushing a baby out. And then there's like an OB on their stomach catching babies. It's brilliant. I mentioned at the beginning that there is a traditional Indigenous midwife who is their resident midwife there. She is amazing. Her name is Mama Rosa, and she offers all kinds of healing, not just birth support, but people will come to her for like limpias, for energetic cleansing, for fertility support, for herbal support. Like she has her own little wing. However, just like an important layer that I think is important as I'm doing this work, she is not recognized on a government level as an employee of the hospital, or at least not as a provider at the hospital. Like the way I was explained to this was explained to me recently. On payroll, she's janitorial staff. Like this is just to show that she's still not recognized, that there is still this huge lack of recognition for Indigenous midwives and Indigenous knowledge. And this is everywhere. And this speaks to the hierarchy of knowledge that we've created in the West, right? Like how when birth went from being a home event to a hospital event, when birth became medicalized, this medical knowledge placed itself at the top of all knowledge. And we still have this hierarchy of like the Western evidence-based care models. You only have to learn from us. We have nothing to learn from you. When there is so much powerful knowledge that has been passed down for centuries and centuries, because babies really only come out one of two ways. There's not like that much that we need to know. And it's great that we now have all these different tools and techniques and ways of keeping moms alive and keeping babies alive. But there's also so many ways of making birth something that's healing and beautiful. And these midwives do a great job at honoring birth. The birth outside of the clinics in Ecuador in a home setting is also very vertical. They will not birth very rarely will a mom like birth on her back in a bed. Like that's just not the vibe. The vibe is that they stay very warm. They keep all their clothes on. That is like an essential part of birth for them, to keep heat inward. So when you see a mom in labor, she's got like hats on, she's sweating, she's like covered in blankets, versus I think about my clients in the States that are like taking all of their clothes off, standing in front of a fan, like just so hot from birth. And these women are keeping all of the heat in. A traditional midwife will never, ever, ever do a vaginal check. That is just like not part of the game. She will feel baby. She will be asking mom for feedback. Now a lot of them have Dopplers. So it's like they're not anti-technology by any means, all for having resources at their disposal. But they're mostly just like communicating with mom, seeing how mom feels. And I witness these women when they're giving birth in Ecuador, they're really touching their bellies. Like they're really engaged with their babies in a way that I don't see in births elsewhere. And I think it's because something that is standard, if you are having a baby and you are supported by a traditional midwife in the community, those midwives will regularly have hands on baby. Starting at like 16 weeks, they will be maneuvering baby to be head down. That is just absolute standard care, which is why, back to that 90% vaginal birth rate. Like breech births, very, very rare, because if a traditional midwife is working with baby from, again, 16 weeks on, she's constantly maneuvering baby down, and it's the gentlest thing. And if you go on our Instagram, I have a ton of videos of the midwives adjusting babies in utero. On a Wombs of the World trip, we witness that. We do not practice that because that would be out of the scope of practice of a doula to learn that. And also, we're only there for about 8 days. And that's like lifetime of knowledge, not something that you would walk away with. But we do on our trip, we often have opportunities to like feel baby's positioning. For doulas who are not midwives, for doulas, not midwives, we rarely get the opportunity to actually like feel what's going on in there. And it's like, we don't want to ask our clients, can we feel your belly? Because we don't want to be overly eager like that. But there we can be. We are eager learners. We are eager to be there. And so most of the time, the mothers participating in the demonstrations, in the ceremonies, are happy to let us feel their bellies and their babies. Would you all like to hear about some of the beautiful traditions that the Ecuador midwives offer? Because I would like for you all to walk away today with at least like one ceremony that you can incorporate into your own practice. Okay, here's one of my favorite ones. How many of you have, well, you don't have to show of hands unless you want to, but how many of you have been at a birth or have been in a prenatal and you know that there is something blocking the mother from progressing? I'm going to imagine a huge show of hands. Thank you. Like whether she's holding on to fear. She's holding on to fear. She's holding on to fear in her body. You're with her at a prenatal, whether she has previous trauma, whether she's experienced loss, whether she is, someone in her life recently passed, like whatever. Pregnant people are going through so much. They hold so much. They hold so much. The womb holds so much. The womb holds so much. These midwives, as soon as they like put hands on the womb, they can feel whether the womb is hot or the womb is cold. And they can also feel whether the womb is storing fear. I can say for most of us that our wombs are storing fear. We hold a lot. It's like in yoga, it's like, oh, the hips, like tension is in the hips. No, the hips are attached to the womb. For men, men, your hips. Okay. So the womb is holding so much. What they do there in order to release, I mean, obviously like Rebozo, but here's more of like a metaphorical thing that you could incorporate into your practice. So what they do is they take large leaves, like they have this one plant that have these like huge, huge leaves, and they'll cleanse the leaf over like the smoke of burning sage and Palo Santo. And then they will place this like warm leaf over the belly. And they'll press it on the belly, and she'll be like praying over the belly to let the leaf absorb anything that womb is storing that is not serving that mother and child. And so she's praying, she's letting the leaf absorb. And then what she does is still holding the leaf attached to the womb, she will begin to rip the leaf. She will begin to rip the leaf, and as she is tearing the leaf, you can see, like, I've never seen this happen without a woman crying. And I've seen them do this to like our participants who have had miscarriages or who are just like holding on to trauma. As soon as that leaf starts to tear, the release happens and they are sobbing. We love tears, right? They are completely releasing this. I have asked these midwives, okay, like when I'm in a hospital birth and she's like, kind of stalled out somewhere and clearly she's holding on to something that's blocking her, but like we don't have a huge leaf and Palo Santo to sage the place, like what do we do? And she said that you can do it with a piece of paper. You can do it with newspaper. You can do it with with a piece of paper. You can do it in your prenatals. You can be talking to one of your clients and writing down the things that they're scared of about birth, that they're holding on to, their trauma, or not. Like if your client does want to have an arts and crafts project with you and write things down on a piece of paper, or if they don't, you can take a piece of newspaper, you can crumble it up, then open it back up so it's just not as harsh as why you crumble. Put it back over the belly, and then you channel the powers that you possess because you're a birth worker and you're a magical being that knows how to be a conductor of all of the magical spirits of birth. You pray over the womb, and then you rip the paper. And you just absorb all of that trauma And then you have this visceral ceremonial experience that you just shared with your client. And it's so simple and it's so beautiful. And I asked permission to share this story with you all, and it was granted. So please, if you feel called to take that, use it, make it your own. I think that that's a really beautiful part of this work. I mentioned earlier how we are all about appreciation, not appropriation. Cultural appropriation is a huge issue in this world. There are so many things that we do, especially in the birth world. When I talk to these Indigenous midwives about it, when I'm like, they don't have the same like concept of like, you are appropriating our knowledge. They're like, we have beautiful knowledge. We want you to honor it. We want you to honor it, and we want you to share it, and we want you to put it to practice. And so when I'm with my doulas on these trips, we're constantly talking about like, okay, we just learned that. How do we then incorporate that into our practices back home? Like, how do we go home and like, obviously I was living at 9,000 feet in Colorado. We don't have giant leaves. Like now I'm in an apartment in Paris, still no giant leaves. So like, how do you blend it into something that is suitable for you, your culture, and your clients? And that example, the piece of paper. Like you find something that's suitable. Or in Ecuador, we learn all about plants and herbal remedies, and they have all of these like salves that they make, and they do this one where they blend chamomile with egg white and oats, and they like put that as a paste over the womb, and it's supposed to pull out the heat. But they say you can do it with any plant. Like they just use chamomile. So what they've encouraged us to do is like find the plants that grow on your land. Like this is a way of, we can honor that we've learned things from them. We can learn how to make a balm. We can learn how to make like a purifying oil, but we can do it with the plants of our own land, with the plants of our own ancestors. This is a similar conversation that I have in Mexico. So now I'm gonna fast forward through the story, but first I'm gonna breathe and let Ashley and Wendy tell me if I need to know anything. We're good? Okay, I keep going.
You're great. Yeah, you're too. I'm really just enthralled with everything that you're talking
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so Ecuador and Tanzania were a go. We're smooth sailing, and then last year I was like, well, last year I had two people reach out to me wanting to start programs, and they were both very real people, because I have a lot of people reaching out being like, you should come here, you should come here, but that's only me. There's not enough me's. I would love to go everywhere. But Mexico and South Africa presented themselves. The Mexico program is now fully active. We have a trip going there in May, and it starts in Mexico City, and then we spend the first 3 nights in Mexico City, and then we go to Oaxaca. And what's really cool about Mexico is there's so many different lineages. There's so many different like flavors and cultures, and Mexico is huge. Mexico is just so amazing, so amazing. And so we get to study with a handful of different midwives that come from different lineages. And each midwife that we work with has their own like specialty of what she does. Like there's one midwife that we work with who specializes in healing trauma. That's like her whole thing. And what she mostly does is herbal baths. And so her clients come to her house, and she has like a different herbal bath depending on whether they're in pregnancy or it's postpartum or just like what kind of trauma they've experienced. She is just a conduit to the herbs. There's another midwife that specializes in rebozo. And you would think, back to the culture is dynamic, birth is universal. Mexican rebozo and Ecuadorian rebozo, very different practices, which is fascinating. The way that they use it is so cool. And also just like the rebozo themselves are like different, very different materials, sizes, textures, like the whole thing is so different. But the purpose of centering a baby and releasing tension in the body is the same. And then we have another woman who is all about ceremony. When we work with her, her name is Partera Paula, and Paula walks us through a traditional cacao ceremony. So I'm going to speak for myself. I have been at different music festivals. I was living in Asheville in Colorado, so like very hippie vibes in both of those communities. And I was present at many cacao ceremonies. And every single time something like wasn't sitting right for me. I was like, this white dude wearing a fedora should not be serving me cacao. So I'm asking Paula about this. I'm like feeling my own anger over how cacao ceremonies have been appropriated in like the West festival scene. And she told me that, and so again, it's similar to that conversation I had with Tai Tai Oscar. She was like, many people are waking up around the world hungry for this knowledge. many people, like our ancestors, are reborn all over the world. And so if there is someone who feels called to this knowledge, that feels called to this plant, that feels called to this ceremony, we must give them the tools. So she says that, and I'm like, oh, cool. And then she tells me the tools are like, you have to study for 8 years, and you have to go to the land, and you have to cultivate your own cacao, and like the list of tools is long. But I love the sentiment that this knowledge is being born everywhere. This like hunger, this waking up, this desire to have these tools is all over the place. And I'm sure you've heard the quote before of like, we are the granddaughters of the witches they did not burn. Well, we be witches now. Like we are reviving so much. Not even reviving, but recognizing, because in a lot of these communities, this knowledge has never disappeared. So, and I hate, like, I was just talking to somebody else, like, it's not our job to reclaim anything either. We are just honoring this knowledge that has already existed for so, so long and bringing it to light, bringing it to social media, bringing it to 2025 in a whole different way. With the end goal that I think, again, we all share if we just want better birth outcomes everywhere. I was going to transition to things outside of before I do that, I have to tell you about South Africa. South Africa trip hasn't started yet. The first trip is going to be in February of 2026. Our trips are for all birth workers. So if you're interested and you want to come, check out our website. You can learn all about our programs there. It's just wombsoftheworld.com. But the South Africa program is in partnership with this amazing, amazing woman named Dr. Matsila Motsei. She has a PhD in Indigenous Midwifery of South Africa. And she has an online course that's called The African Spirituality of Childbirth. This is on my website because she's launching a new cohort. You should take her course too. But Matsilo, essentially, for her PhD, she started as a midwife like 30 years ago, raised kids, did the whole thing. She has written books on like anti-violence. She's amazing. She's amazing. But she got her PhD in Indigenous Midwifery of South Africa, and she traveled all over South Africa to learn from the women who were doing the work, from these elders, from these spirit teachers. And after she got her PhD, she was like, I can't just have this knowledge sit on a shelf. I have to bring people to them. Like, this needs to be shared. This needs to stay alive. And so she launched a trip, and she was able to connect with an organization called Black Women's Blueprint. And they were able to get a group of midwives out there. And this was like 3 years ago. And then she reached out to Wombs of the World, and now we're her partner in this project and hoping to bring a really amazing crew to South Africa in 2026 to learn from her and from this whole amazing collection of midwives that she has in store for us. So that is South Africa. So I haven't been yet, and I can't wait. So you should come with me. February 2026. It's on the website. Okay, I've now told you about our trips. I would love to transition into a different space, one that I was not expecting to discover with Wombs of the World, but I think is imperative in our role as birth workers, and that is social justice. When Wombs of the World trips happen, for the most part, they are the most magical, incredible thing ever. We are a group of 8 to 12 birth workers from all over the place coming together, and we just get to geek out on birth from the moment we land to the second we leave. Like, it is so fun to immediately connect with people, and you're like, oh, you get it. Like, you're my same kind of birth nerd. You know, we're like swapping birth stories. We are like, I love it on day 8 when people are swapping their breastfeeding PowerPoints. I'm constantly learning so much from the women who attend our trips. And like a part of the evolution of this program that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but it's the power of groups coming together and how groups like this have never come together before. We have incredibly diverse groups. Our programs primarily attract women of color. And I think that is a pretty obvious thing because they are hungry for their ancestral knowledge that has been violently taken from their ancestors. And so that now they do not have. And so our programs often attract Indigenous and women of color from around the world to come on these trips. And so we have these amazing ceremonies and we have a super diverse crew. We've got these 12 women where, you know, it can be like a Black midwife in California and a woman in Tennessee who's never left the state of Tennessee before. And that is a bigger cultural difference than like me traveling to Ecuador or me like you maybe like talking to the Maasai people in Tanzania. Like the cultural divide across the United States is huge. as I'm sure we're all aware. And health disparities around the world are despicable, especially towards women of color. And so when Wombs of the World was starting, I'm like, the first couple iterations, we're calling them birth worker retreats. Now they are educational programs for doulas, advanced birth worker trainings. I'm very intentional that these programs are educational because reciprocity is at the core of what we do. So even the Tanzania program is not a volunteer trip, it is a learning opportunity. It's like if a volunteer, if one of the doulas wants to have the greatest impact on that clinic, whatever she was going to pay Wombs of the World plus her airfare, please donate that directly to the clinic. $5,000 straight to the clinic is going to have a way bigger impact on everything than you showing up for a week and loving on mamas and babies and chatting it up with the nurses. So reciprocity is essential in everything we do. So I've been in these circles with women where I hear things for the first time, like I've never felt safe sitting in circle with white women before. I hear that. I'm like, how do I process that? How do I continue creating space where everyone feels really welcome and included and safe? And to do that, I've had to do a tremendous amount of work. I think a lot of us birth workers, especially birth workers who are social justice oriented, who do want to fight health disparities, I think we've all done a whole lot of work to take accountability for the wrongdoings of our ancestors and our present people in this world. So how do we continue to create safe spaces? How can I be an ancestor that is creating social change for my descendants? How can this right now, these circles, create healings for generations to come? And it's been really, really powerful and really, really special to be able to cultivate these conversations and create these spaces where birth workers come together and sit in the discomfort, face things that they might not have thought about before, and then go home with just such a different view of birth, not just on like their personal scale, but on a global scale. Because like my last trip to Ecuador, just kidding, my last trip to Tanzania, the last trip I was just on, we were 8 women living in 6 different countries. Like we had so much to share. We had so much to share with each other about birth in our respective places. Like birth in Senegal, so different from birth in Dubai, from birth in France, from birth in Kenya, from birth in the US. Like birth is a global social justice issue. And the way that we treat our mothers is a direct representation of how our societies are treated. Okay, so enter the magic, the revolution of the birth worker. I feel this with all of my heart. Birth workers, doulas, midwives, we are the foot soldiers in the maternal health revolution that is so desperately needed on a global scale. We are the ones that are taking care of mothers, and if we don't take care of mothers, who is going to take care of the rest of us? I was just at a maternal health conference, the Black Maternal Health Conference UK in London over the weekend. And I heard speech after speech after speech of these women sharing about how they felt neglected, not listened to, mistreated, not believed, things that echo in the United States as well with Black maternal health. Like the health disparities in the UK are very similar to the health disparities in the US of Black women dying at 3 to 4 times the rate of white women. So I'm hearing these stories, amazing panelists, just like absolutely amazing conversation. And they're talking about how their mother was their advocate, their sister was their advocate, their friend was their advocate. And I'm sitting in the room screaming, wanting to scream, where were your doulas? Like, where were your doulas? Doulas, we are professional support people. We are there to advocate. We are there to believe, to build these relationships, to honor, to revere birth. And I feel as though in the States and in like certain parts of Europe, doulas are understood and recognized, but identity politics are so strongly at play. Like in the UK, and it's same in France, like midwives have this belief that doulas are trying to replace them, or that like a doula is an unqualified midwife that's just going to like result in free birth and babies dying, because that might have happened a couple of times. But those like handful of stories that did happen of those like very like rogue doulas that whatever happened, like those are the stories that stuck versus the thousands of births, millions of births doulas have supported and improved. And what I absolutely love about doula care is that we're not going to rewrite medical textbooks overnight to honor and revere birth. We're not going to redesign every single birth room around the world for it to feel safe and cozy and welcoming like it should. But what we can do is we can add the doula. We can add the doula. And women who choose to be doulas, not just women, but mostly it's us who are called. Women who are called to this work, we we don't even have to have like a high school degree. Doula care is so accessible. Like learning how to support someone to make them feel safe and seen and heard, for them to have a better birth experience so that they can go into motherhood feeling empowered and not traumatized, regardless of how it goes down. Because I'm sure y'all have been at births where it's like super traumatic, but the client, like the mom, doesn't realize it was traumatic, but you as the birth worker, you're like, oh, that was not okay. But they don't need to know that, because like you brought them the peace, because you, the doula, or you, the midwife, or you, amazing birth worker, clearly you are, because if you're here listening, you are clearly so called to wanting to do good things with birth. This is revolutionary, and this has never been done before. Welcome to 2025, when we have the ability to share this knowledge, where I have the ability to tell you how they're protecting moms in Tanzania, how they're honoring moms in Ecuador and in Mexico and all over the world. We get to come together and share this incredible knowledge, because culture is dynamic, but birth is universal. I think that's it.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I am so inspired every time I talk to you, Charlotte. I'm very curious. Our theme for Birth Psychology Month this year is the innate wisdom of birth, how womb ecology becomes world ecology. How does this theme apply to you and your organization? What does it mean?
I mean, I want to like tangent on my master's degree, talking about like literally womb psychology and how our wombs hold generations that have come before, right? But I want to take it more in like a social context of birth when we say womb ecology.
Yeah.
Are you all familiar, maybe some of you are, maybe some of you aren't, with the ACE assessment, Adverse Childhood Experiences?
It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Yeah.
Great, Ashley. Take it away. Okay, so the ACE assessment is essentially this assessment that has like 10 questions, kind of two-part questions, all about trauma. And what's cool when you give the assessment is you don't need to know what they checked yes to, like if they had domestic violence or an incarcerated parent or drugs in the household or anything like that. What you need to know at the end of giving the assessment is the number. And what has been shown is that Charlotte thesis available. What has been shown is that the higher the number of the ACE assessment, so the more childhood trauma somebody experiences, the more they have their likelihood of having a long-term illness skyrockets, whether that's cancer, stroke, diabetes, ADHD, depression, like all of these things that that sometimes will, like, there's like, oh, well, there's no pre-existing condition. It's like the ACE, the Adverse Childhood Experience Assessment, the ACE assessment. It's like, oh, there was no pre-existing condition. This person just had a stroke. And it's like, well, no, like, do we know about their childhood trauma history? Because essentially the theory there is that in little bodies, in children's bodies, when there is trauma experienced, that trauma can turn into toxic stress in the body, and then that toxic stress can turn into illness. Okay, again, where doulas come in. The way that we fight childhood trauma turning into toxic stress in little bodies is by giving them a safe person to turn to, by creating a secure attachment. If that little person has a safe person to turn to, that trauma does not need to turn into toxicity in their body. This is how we this is how we take care of our children, right? But if a mom, so let's say in a traumatic situation, if you're in like, you know, you're housing insecure, you're food insecure, your partner is abusive, like, you know, mom is also traumatized, right? Because moms hold everything. So if a child is going through a lot of trauma at home, likelihood the parent is also going through a lot of trauma at home. We as birth workers, we get to see women, we get to see mothers in one of these most vulnerable windows of time. And if we have the power of supporting them through this super difficult transition, to give them more tools to take care of themselves, to help them become food secure, to just sometimes be a witness, sometimes going into a home and being like, oh, I see this is not a safe place for you to be. Having a witness that comes in, that's not their friend, that's not their family, but is like an outside witness, gives them permission to do something about it in a way that the friend or the parent or people who are really intertwined in their life can't grant permission for, right? So kind of what I was saying earlier, Ashley, it's like, if we don't take care of the world's mothers, who's going to take care of the rest of us? So I really feel as though by taking care and honoring the mom in this transition and helping her get set up on the right foot, we're taking care of that womb ecology. which is then rippling out into like societal ecology, because, you know, the family, the community, the society, the planet.
Yes, it is a ripple effect. I feel like this information, once you learn it, you cannot unsee it. And it just, you can't stop telling everyone about it because it's so impactful.
Yeah, ACE assessments and Maasai birth are like my go-to bar talk.
I love
That's
that. There were some questions, Charlotte, earlier you were talking about, sometimes the stark differences that doulas are met with when they're going into a different culture, a different community to learn from. There's a question here. How do you work with participants in your programs who are going to countries and not be there trying to patronize people in those cultures and communities, and who are very knowledgeable and learning wisdom from different midwives? Normally, we tend to think we know much more than they do, but they're the healers of their communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's our biggest approach, is that we don't ever go in as the like holders of knowledge. Our approach, super roundtable, all about reciprocity, and we are just the eager learner in that setting, which I think is trying to like tip the scale of that hierarchy of knowledge of like, if we come in and we do have this knowledge, like I've had OBGYNs travel with us who have so much knowledge, but when they put down that like white coat agency that they possess, when they put that down and they want to learn from the midwife, the traditional midwife, we're like rebalancing that hierarchy of knowledge. Before travel, all participants are required to take our like cultural something course, sensitivity, humility, curiosity. We were calling it a cultural competency course, but then it was brought to our attention that nobody can be culturally competent in anything because the culture is so dynamic. But it takes our participants through a lot of self-reflection, awareness, and education about where we're stepping into, so that we erase any kind of saviorism. Like saviorism is not tolerated on any of our programs, and nor are they designed for that. That's why I'm really intentional with language of like, we're not going in there to like save any mommies or babies. Have we? Yes. Have moms' lives been saved because we have been present? Yes. We've had nurses prevent hemorrhages. We've done a lot of really cool stuff. They have CPAP machines, but saviorism is not the intention. Reciprocity is. And I could talk to you. I have a lot of tangents I could go down.
That's really a beautiful answer. I'm really curious, in your experience, what is the most powerful thing a doula, midwife, birth professional can offer a birthing woman, regardless of the culture or location?
I mean, like kindness,
Present.
presence, believing in her, letting her lead, like letting her set the pace for what's up. I think that the beauty of the role of a doula or a midwife is that we build a relationship with our clients for the most part, right? Something that I hear regularly when it comes to like the mistreatment of pregnant people is that their doctors are so rushed in their visits. There's just this, they're so rushed. There's this lack of time. Like in India, for example, it's a 90, certain regions of India, but the one I was in Kerala, it's a 90% C-section rate. 90%, because they have to schedule births because there are so few providers to so many births. And that's just how they have to handle it. It's like the harmony in their chaos. And midwives and doulas, the fact that we might be able to create more time to just revere this process. Like birth is a big deal. Birth is a huge, 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 huge deal. It is the death of the maiden and the birth of a mother. And if we gave birth the same amount of like energy that we give to fighting death, like we'd probably be really further ahead in all things if we honored birth better. So yeah, what I think just all about honoring the mother and just giving her that time and the space to be fully seen, fully herself, and believing her as she shares her process.
That's beautiful, and I completely agree. I'm sorry if I have background noise,
You're
but
fine.
I'm really curious. You have done some beautiful work. I'm so impressed with your organization and what you have built. What have been some of the challenges and triumphs in transforming Wombs of the World into an international force?
I'm so good at some things and I'm so bad at others. Thanks for asking. Um, So Wombs of the World currently has three different branches. We have our Wombs of the World LLC, which is based in Colorado. And then we are also a nonprofit, the Wombs of the World Foundation. And the foundation is based on supporting our community-led initiatives. So like doing more for the clinics in Tanzania, supporting Martha's projects in Ecuador, things that can't come out of our direct budget. And then we also have Wombs of the World Europe, which is essentially how I have a visa to live here in France. So the biggest challenge I have faced, and I'm putting this out there, if any of you have any leads, is around fundraising. Like this takes money to accomplish, and I hate asking people for money. I hate it. I hate it. It makes me so deeply uncomfortable. Ugh, everything about it right now in my body. I hate it. So fundraising is not my strong suit. Like sponsorship outreach, not my strong suit. Building programs, education, like getting people fired up, definitely my strong suit. And that's been the biggest challenge of just trying to figure out how to keep the lights on while doing this super mission-driven work because I'm never without enthusiasm for this work, ever. I've got enough enthusiasm for this work for generations to come, but like I have to have part-time jobs sometimes, even though this is very full-time work. So if any of you listening have leads on people who might want to sponsor us, that'd be great. Thanks.
I think you're talking to the right community, Charlotte. We're going to make sure that we're dropping your contact info into the chat again. We've dropped it in a couple of times. If
Thank you.
there's a lot going on in the chat, so it's hard to scroll up. Your contact info, your social media are also on our website, and it's gone out emails for folks as well. And I'm always happy to make warm introductions. That's one of my favorite things about my job. So you can always email me if anybody has questions or wants to get connected to Charlotte. I would love to do that for you.
Yes.
I'm just going to zoom through the chat and see if we're missing anything. I want to reiterate too that this talk is going to be up on our Birth Psychology Month homepage. And we can put the link into the chat as well so that folks can go back and watch this replay. We need a couple of hours to take it off of Zoom and put it on there. So bear with us as we're working through technology, but it'll be up for 48 hours as well for folks to pick up and rewatch if they've missed anything or they want to go back through and pull out all of those amazing, just like inspiring, passionate lines that you had, Charlotte.
Yeah, I get real fired up. Like
I'm here for it. I love it.
The world needs more doulas.
Yeah.
And like compassionate labor and delivery nurses and OBGYNs.
So here for it. Well, I think we've gotten through most of the really pertinent questions. I really highly encourage you all to follow along with Charlotte along her journey. Ashley, am I missing anything that you want to get to? Okay, well, I just want to say that we're so grateful for all of you being here. This is our final week of Birth Psychology Month, which is so bittersweet because Ashley and I love seeing everyone's faces every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And we have nothing short planned for amazing things that we're bringing this week. Wednesday, join us on Instagram or catch those conversations later on our website. We have conversations with Luca Barba, Christine Loria, Nilifer Divisigil, and so many more. And then Friday will be our final midwifery highlight with Bliss Young. And we're just so grateful for all of you being here. Thank you so much, Charlotte.
You are so welcome. I'm seeing access to my thesis. It is, you don't want to read my thesis. It was very put together last minute, but the thesis of life, 'tis Wombs of the World. And I write a lot. I have a newsletter that nobody reads because it's so long, but I do pour a lot into that about all of these things. If you want to sign up on the newsletter for the newsletter on our website, and also my Instagram posts are really long. Again, no one reads them, but you're welcome to.
Don't say no one because Ashley and I read them.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. I do feel the engagement. Thank you. But yes, I pour a lot into those.
Awesome. Well, we are going to just invite you all to come off of mute, say goodbye, and yeah, I read them. Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for your beautiful presentation and your stories. I could just sit with you for hours. I want to invite everyone to come off mute and say goodbye and thank you. And
thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
I want to go on a
Thank
trip
you.
with you, honey. It makes me want to go on a trip with you.
Barbara, come on a trip. Come on a trip. You can totally come on a trip.
Barbara,
Yes.
if you're going on a trip, I'm going on the same trip.
I will
Yeah.
go with you.
We all going on the trip.
Please.
Yeah. We need to create an APPA trip for everybody.
Oh, it sounds so exciting to learn from these Indigenous midwives and to see birth the way birth was meant to be. And we can learn so much from these midwives, certainly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's have an APPA trip. I'm all for that.
Here for it.